Hi, this is Brad Jersak, and today I'm hosting an IRPJ interview with my colleague, Dr. David Moore. We teach together at St. Stephen's University in Canada, but he's actually based in California. And the reason I've asked for this interview today is just because of the incredible crisis around racism and violence towards the Black community in America, and I'm at a loss. So when I thought, okay, is there somebody who's part of the Black Lives Matters movement, if that's even true? I want to come in with almost no assumptions, right? But what I can say is that we're colleagues, that you've written this amazing book on making America great again. The beauty of which is in the subtitles. What was the subtitles, David?
Three questions: fairy tale, horror story, dream come true, a challenge to Christians, and an appeal to the global community.
Very good. And so I'd really encourage people to get a hold of that book. It's on Amazon and other places. But aside from being colleagues at the university and being an author, what else are you into?
Well, I lead two congregations in very different demographics. One here in Santa Barbara, and one good 45-minute drive from the former to Church for the Nations in Oxnard, where I have some deep roots. That's where I went to high school and junior high. Spent a big part of my life there.
Okay, very good. And you established you do identify with hashtag Black Lives Matters. I have a feeling people don't really know how that arose and what it's about. And I'm really disturbed by people who simply think of it as a mirror image to like white supremacy or something. And I know that's not true. And I want to give you a chance here to set that straight. What is that all about? How did it come to be?
Well, it emerged almost accidentally. There was a Twitter post made after the killing of Trayvon Martin, and the hashtag Black Lives Matter went viral, and there are three women who started to organize around that title, and it spread around the country. I see it as the contemporary version of the freedom movement, led by the Black Panthers, and the civil rights movement, led most notably by Martin Luther King. It's more inclusive, though. I mean, Black Lives Matter was founded by three queer women. It's a very different look from the civil rights movement, which was black males, Christian black males, pretty much controlled the image and pretty much all the activities. So this is evolution as far as I'm concerned, and very needed.
So do you see them what would be their goals? What are they promoting and hoping for, narrowly or broadly? What are we meant to listen to here?
I think the appeal is always for justice. The demand is always for justice, and also for an accounting for white supremacy.
Okay. Yeah. So we've seen even very recently both the what I'd call the murder of George Floyd by police community or police officers, and then also like outside of the law enforcement thing, Ahmed Aubrey's death, and so again it's brought to light that unarmed Black people being murdered in the streets, even by those who have a badge and those who pretend they do, And then this goes back also to what was going on with Colin Kaepernick taking the knee. That's what he was protesting, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to say about that whole thing? Because again, I'll bring in these awful toxic counterpoints. It's like, well, what's he doing? And he's trying to get attention, and he's using it's a bully pulpit. And I'm like, that's not what's happening here. There was many young black men, especially, but being killed in a whole series of, and it's like it's risen up again, hasn't it? And
Yeah, it has risen up again only because of a video recording, because it never subsided.
right,
And
right.
uh, African Americans deal with this hostility on a daily basis. I mean, today's Friday. There's really nothing different except for the fact that Monday people had video cameras, had phone cameras, and captured that encounter, or else we probably wouldn't know anything about it. But our neighborhoods, especially where there's a concentration of African Americans, tend to be under siege, and a lot of that siege is law enforcement. And I know it's easy to think of our neighborhoods as being especially violent because our young men especially kill one another so much. But they don't manufacture guns. They don't ship guns. Uh, some of those guns come from places where guns are worshipped and then sold at a profit. Taking advantage of desperate people, because that's what they are. I mean, these are people who don't see themselves having a future, and so they're fighting for turf. Fighting for definition of their identities, and so basically, it's almost like drugs. I mean, you might remember back in the '80s there was a crack epidemic, but the drugs were being channeled. It's been proven now that the government was involved in funneling those drugs into the black community. So there is both an active and a passive effort towards ethnic cleansing. There's a term that I use pretty often called a disorder of territoriality, where whites feel like they have the title to every location, and to see a black person anywhere, standing in line at the bank or the ATM or buying groceries or in a library, being accepted in a university and trying to study there, wherever black people are, they know they are seen as interlopers. We know that we are seen as trespassers wherever we go in America.
Wow. I mean, that's really gruesome. And I've noticed this too in terms of, I can go into a restaurant or a church or wherever, and I don't have to think about whether I'm welcome. It's not even a conscious thought normally. Um, and yet, if I go into a pub or whatever with a black friend, they're put in a state of hypervigilance because of exactly what you're talking about. Have you experienced that?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
It's the
And in fact,
aquarium that you live
in
in.
in in my younger years, I tried to be invisible, and tried to raise my kids to be invisible, not to stand out anywhere. Um, but at some point, I decided I'm going to let my hair grow and let everything fly.
Yeah, you get to be seen, and that itself then is speaking truth to power just by being seen, and the fact that something that simple is an an act is activism shows me that we like how difficult the environment is to be black in America right now.
Yeah.
Well, I can't even grasp it. The other thing is I can go home at the end of the day and not think about this, but this occupies your waking and sleeping life, no doubt, and your kids.
It's always there. So when we see what happened, this week in Minneapolis, the first thing that comes to mind is I have 4 adult sons. I have brothers. My wife has brothers. I mean, we think about that because we're always exposed.
Wow.
In
So,
fact, there's an action, a protest being organized by some of my white friends here in Santa Barbara tonight. I had a conversation yesterday with some of my African American friends who didn't feel like it was time for them. And one of the reasons is that we feel vulnerable. You know, we only constitute 1% of the population here in Santa Barbara. And so I think it's probably better for our white friends to protest first.
do you ever? Now, I've run into this when I'm trying to be an ally. Um, I know sometimes it's not appreciated that I'm speaking for the marginalized because I'm using up their bandwidth, and yet, do you have input for me about that? Like, what are the ways to be an ally and to be an advocate and to speak up that don't actually contribute to the marginalization?
Well, you're using the bandwidth, but you used from the outset. You used the bandwidth to promote my book, so that's kind of like a partnership
Yeah.
uh, to elevate a voice in your circles. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe, and that's a way that I, without displacing you from your stage or whatever. I, I I'm super excited about this fall because you and L.A. Henry are going to be co-teaching this course we do on race and gender issues in the 21st century. I'm really intrigued about how you're going to approach that. And so if I were sitting in, I may get to sit in. I should ask you student questions that I would have. One of them would be like, how do you view the riots right now in Minneapolis, and how should I how should I be perceiving this? Because that too can then just be a way of nullifying that there's a justice problem.
Yeah. Um, a couple of thoughts on that. Um, that first of all, uh, people say that that's wrong. Yesterday, for a few minutes, I didn't follow it for long, but I watched the coverage of the riots in Minneapolis. My wife and and um, we watched the feed, the comments that went along with the images. And most of the people commenting were white, and they were complaining and they were criticizing. Rarely would anybody just say, "What's going on?" There was no reflection, only judgment,
Okay, yeah.
and that divides us because it speaks to the arrogance of white supremacy. This, the presumption of knowledge, and the presumption that they're able to prescribe solutions better than we can for ourselves. I have an encyclopedia in some 2 volume set, the Encyclopedia of Race Riots in America, going back 300 years, and most of those riots were led by whites against people of color. It's not until the 60s that things change, where black people feel sufficiently emboldened to stand up to the terror. It's domestic terrorism that we've been dealing with our whole life. When you see protesters they're called protesters, going to state government centers to protest the sheltering in place orders, the lockdowns. When you see that and they're carrying automatic weapons and grenade launchers and things like that, that's domestic terrorism. They are saying, we showed up to let you know that we are packing and we demand that we have our way. We all know that if a group of the Black Panthers tried that one time, and ended up getting arrested. black people are not going to gather at a government center with a bunch of high-powered weapons. So what we're looking at here is in Minneapolis, these riots. We're looking at a reaction to the riots that happened against us and continue to happen against us. This land that we live on was looted. The resources in this land are the result of looting and rioting against the original inhabitants of the land and the enslavement of African peoples. So to criticize one and not criticize the other is disingenuous. To say this is wrong, never saying that was wrong, is problematic.
And asymmetric, like it's sort of like one of the critiques I heard at the last election, between candidates. Well, they're both bad, and then I think it was Navarro who said, "Okay, we're comparing strep throat with leukemia here." So it's not just like, well, there's some rotten apples on both sides. There's an asymmetry to this that seems like so obvious to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, is it? So I'm warm about that. You think I could be seeing the truth?
Thank you for that. I can't remember recently using the term asymmetrical, but I'm going to employ that more frequently in this moment.
Yeah. The other thing is with riots, it doesn't start as a riot. It can start as a peaceful protest. It only becomes a riot when there's heavy-handedness. I know that's
when there's escalation.
Yeah, I think that's an issue with police culture that my friend Jamie Winship, I talked to him yesterday. He was formerly a police officer in Washington, D.C. metro area. And he said, this is a big problem in the training. There's escalation rather than de-escalation in the culture, and the bravado and all of that stuff. And it just, and I compare that with the tiki torch thing, and I'm like, we're not looking at the same thing, people. So, yeah. Okay. So what happens though, for me, my temptation is, let's say I'm kind of have some violence in my heart, and I'm, as a Christ follower, I'm trying to deal with the violence in my heart as somebody who was bullied growing up. And when I see what I perceive as bullying, my temptation is to switch sides without switching spirits. And so now I just want to go bully the bullies, and I like, and I want to hate. So I'm not being freed from hatred, and that's where, like, listening to sermons by Martin Luther King Jr. are so convicting to me. It feels like he warns me away from becoming the monster that I hate. How do you deal with that? Because for me, it's so secondary in some ways, and I don't have skin in the game, so to speak.
Yeah.
How do you avoid becoming the monster in opposing?
Well, I think I probably enjoy an advantage possibly that you could benefit from that you don't have, and that is I have some deep relationships that ground me. Spiritual African American academics. We surround one another. We talk to one another, and we keep one another sane, and from going off the deep end.
Okay, so there's a kind of interdependence.
It's a fraternity, and when I say fraternity, a fraternity/sorority.
Yeah, that keeps you grounded. That's so. What kind of things would you say to one another that do that? Like, let's say this week, and there's a lot of emotions running high, but you reach out to one of your friends. What are you going to say or hear in that conversation that keeps you sane?
Yeah, it's a really broad conversation all the time. There are always multiple things happening. We know that the way that the coronavirus has been dealt with in our country feels like ethnic cleansing to us. we are dying at a much more rapid rate, um, and so this is like the context of everything we're talking about. Facing the fact that our country wants, I talked about the disorder of territoriality, that our country just doesn't is uncomfortable with us being present, especially males, it seems, but in people of color in general, we feel very unwelcome, and so when I talk with my colleagues, we are instantly welcome in one another's presence. We rejoice over hearing one another's voices. There's not a lot of minutia to work our way through to get to the subject. We can continue the conversation next week that we started this week, that kind of thing.
That's fascinating because that's been my experience with 12-step recovery as well. That you've got,
Oh,
let's
it's
say,
like that.
yeah, you've got AA people getting together, and even when they don't propose solutions, the fact of belonging and being able to share without all those filters generates hope. And so there is kind of a parallel there, hey?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to, I kind of see another area where maybe this ethnic cleansing gets to work, and it's on the poor in general, but of course then the Black community with army recruitment. Like, is that, it feels to me like recruiting young Black men and women to the army and then sending them overseas is a good way to do ethnic cleansing. Is there validity in that observation, or am I stretching?
Well, yeah, there is. It's very strategic on the part of a white supremacist state to not provide health care for the poor, but they can get health care if they enlist.
Right. Yeah, that.
People who can't otherwise afford to attend a state university can get a VA grant if they just go and risk their lives somewhere.
Yeah, that seems self-evidently evil to me. But let's not let it go unstated. Why is that a problem? Isn't that a great solution?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I want to look at fear with you for a moment. I'm thinking about the underlying fears that drive white supremacists. I'm thinking about the fears that the Black community has to deal with all the time. And you've already alluded to some of it, but so can you just speak to that a little bit about how the role of fear in all of this and the way it polarizes and escalates?
Well, I think that there's a fear. Someone mentioned to me just earlier today how the story in the book of Exodus in the Bible of the Pharaoh calling for the deaths of all of the male babies. They didn't want to get outnumbered. They knew that it was an unjust society that did not provide opportunity for the Hebrew people, and so they decided, we'll just kill them before they can get started. There is a fear in the United States of people of color and especially of African American males. You probably saw the story of a woman by the name of Amy Cooper was out with her dog in a park earlier this week.
Yeah.
And there was an African American man, Christian Cooper. They have the same last name. Christian Cooper told her that she needed to leash her dog, and she pulled out her phone and said, "I'm calling the police on you. I'm going to say that an African American male is threatening me." I don't doubt that she was genuinely frightened, but that is a reflection of the way that our society has conditioned people.
Right. We're raised into this. We're conditioned, and there's a propaganda that's infused into
Yeah.
children from a very young age. Even
I mean, who is more innocuous than a bird watcher?
it had escaped me that they had the same last name too. That that's a fascinating sidelight. Yeah, so there's this kind of entitlement, territorial, what did you call it?
Disorder of territoriality.
Yeah, including that park apparently,
Yeah.
and the fear there. What are your fears? Do you have fear?
I think probably my fears have more to do with the coming generation, including my own kids,
Yeah.
and just how youth are so vulnerable. Um, just terrifyingly vulnerable. Can I share something with you? It's only like a minute long.
I'd prefer if it was 5 or 10, but go for it.
It's a
Yeah.
it's a video. Let me hold on. Um, don't want to mess up your flow here.
I'm not feeling messed up at all. Um,
Okay,
you're good
so
company. So,
this appeared on the internet a couple of days ago. I'm going to share screen. A a young black man. How do I share screen? I don't. Oh, here it is. Okay, you've disabled screen sharing.
how can I enable it?
Go down to share screen
Yep.
at the bottom and
Yep.
switch the setting.
One participant can share at a time.
Yeah, switch it to multiple.
Multiple. Let's try that. Does that work?
Yeah. Okay, so
There we
here
are.
you go.
I'm a young black man doing all that I can to stand. Oh, but when I look around and I see what's being done to my kind every day, I'm being hurt to this prey. My people don't want no trouble. We've had enough struggle. I just wanna live. God protect me. I just wanna live. I just wanna live.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, so that was floating around for a couple of days, and he actually sang it a cappella, and my son Jared uh, found it and put the music tracks to it.
I mean so there's the heart cry, and if we could hear that and see that in people, it's he had the intelligence t-shirt on too, and just the assumptions about the assumptions like, oh my goodness, an intelligent young black man. What a rarity. No, like that's the kind of stupidity out there, right? And it's like this, but that's the heart cry across the board in general. I would think he's just been able to put words to it that are so beautiful. What stirs in your soul when you hear that?
Uh, all of the boys like him around this country who want to live.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, my generation. I mean, we've been harassed by police. Myself, my brothers, um, and so we can relate to that kid. Those of us who have survived. But it's not just it's not only the police that the state uses to repress African Americans and others. It's not just the police. It's a multi-pronged effort. I mentioned healthcare. We are deprived of healthcare. and that's why we have to go to war. So at least we think we do. Yeah, so that's what goes through my mind is all of these kids.
Yeah.
I know what it's like to be his age. It just so happens that my profile in my community, I'm a pastor, I'm a community leader. So when I walk down the street, there's a good chance I'll be recognized. But for the local college student, African American college student, um, I have a friend who is a police chief, and she was the chief of the department in Oxnard, where our other church is. Her name is Jerry Williams. Her son was a standout basketball player at Arizona State University, and now he's on the roster for I think the Phoenix Suns. Al Williams. Anyway, when Al was living here in Santa Barbara because he attended University of California, Santa Barbara. Um, One day he called his mom, the chief of police in a city 40 miles to our south. He called his mom in tears, and he said, "Mom, I hate to bring you in to this, but I just got pulled over for the sixth time by the same officer." And so she dealt with it by calling her counterpart, the chief of police in our city, who's a different one from the one that's here now, and it got resolved. But she said, "But what about all the African American kids who don't have a chief of police for a parent?"
Right. Right. I'm so sorry. Um, I want to stand in identificational repentance for the racism and the knee on the neck for centuries, and for the things I say and don't say that contribute to the systemic injustice. I'm so sorry. And I can't even say them because I'm even blind to my own prejudice and racism and privilege. The best I can do is say help, ask you for help. Are there some baby steps I can take that would move me forward in being part of the solution instead of the problem?
Speak up and act up as much as you can. Never see yourself as being, when you speak up and act up, don't see yourself as being extreme, but as righting historic wrongs.
Mm.
And you will stand out when you do that, because otherwise you're going to live in the flow of the past. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just seeing the Beatitudes through all of this, blessed are the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, those who hunger and thirst for justice, the merciful, those who with pure hearts see the face of God in their brothers and sisters and see them as brothers and sisters. And having seen that, become blessed peacemakers who will be persecuted for the sake of justice. This is Christ's program from the beginning, at the very core of his initial sermon. I'm really grateful to you, Dave, for your part in that and for showing us the way, and to be an example and to be a conversation partner who tries to inform rather than just shaming people like me who are playing serious catch up. So I really appreciate it. Before I head out, is there anything else you'd want to say to me or to our listeners today?
My heart goes out to the First Nations, because you're in Canada.
Yes.
My heart goes out to them. I think that there's greater friction between the dominant society there with Native Americans. Here it is African Americans plus Native Americans. But honestly, I feel more comfortable as a black man in most places in Canada than I do in my own country.
Mm.
So that probably says a lot.
Yeah, yeah, my daughter-in-law is an Indigenous woman. I was wearing the shirt yesterday, "Love wins," and she says, "Of course, love wins, but you have to love first for it to win." And there are things to atone for, whatever that means and however that looks, right? And I'm like, "Yep, they have had it rough," and so it's interesting that, let's say, I could try to make space for you to speak today, but what am I doing for my First Nations neighbors? And do I still have all those unconscious and not entirely unconscious
Yeah.
prejudices at work? And our system is really rough. They don't have a voice much at all. It's been seriously crushed. So thanks for reminding us about them, and for St. Stephen's role in trying to build bridges with them. That's good work, and we're gonna be happy to have you there in person again before long. So once again, thank you for this time. I know it's been a busy week for you, and there's a lot going on a lot in your heart. So that you would make space for this really is honoring. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for calling, Brad.
My pleasure.